I watch so much true crime that when I last ended up at a rando's house that I met on Tinder at 1 a.m., I knocked on the door and I smelled bleach. And then I thought, this is it. This is me about to get murdered and end up on somebody's true crime podcast. So yeah, I knocked on the door, and when my date arrived, I was like, uh, you look nothing like your picture. And he was like, nigga, neither do you. We both laughed though. Cool dude. We smoke and play Madden every Tuesday now. So yeah, he basically robs niggas. But anyway, have you ever witnessed a suicide or perhaps come across a dead body? I have. And it changes you. I've seen two inadvertently, and both in hindsight. One of which caused me a rather severe case of PTSD regarding gunshots, though I didn't recognize it until years later upon deciding to seek therapy. In short, when a person experiences a trauma, be it physical or mental, the fight or flight mechanism that God or millions of years of evolution developed can be switched on, and a snapshot of the state of your nervous system is saved by your brain. So, in normal people, that snapshot is deleted at a later date thanks to neuroplasticity. Unfortunately, for us broken people, sometimes the save remains much longer. Here's an example. Let's say you are a hoe, or as I like to call it, my ex, and you're cheating on your partner, and your partner asks you to use your phone, and like an amateur, yours isn't locked, so you start sweating bullets, your hands are shaking, your brain is running the numbers and scenarios at light speed, and you've already considered breaking the phone, but you know damn well your mom just got you that phone and she will literally kill you, and you can't afford to buy a new one because you only have a negative $37 in your bank account. Damn, this is oddly personal. You've already started wondering if you can call Eric, Farrell, or Tyrone to help you move your stuff out. Then you realize that these niggas ain't shit, so fuck them. Especially Eric. Fuck Eric. Then right as she picks up your phone, your mom calls. Look at God. Now fast forward 15 years. You've settled down. Your knees bother you from time to time, but life is good. You love your spouse. And your wife asks to use your phone, which you keep unlocked because you are a faithful, loving husband and you have nothing to hide. So you toss her the phone right away and go back to watching the game. You aren't nervous. You aren't worried, and you're not cheating. But for some odd reason, you start sweating bullets and your hands are shaking. You assume it must be hot, and also you did get a little chubby over COVID. Plus your sugar might be a little bit low again. This is so oddly personal. You feel like your body's betraying you. And as a result of the dissonance between your mind and your body, a battle ensues between the two, and more often than not, your body wins and repeats the exact same chaotic snapshot from years ago, even though you aren't doing anything wrong. And that's a layman's explanation of post-traumatic stress disorder. And that is the experience of a person who is cheating. So could you imagine what veterans go through? People with PTSD often have trouble with depression, substance abuse, and a myriad of other ailments. Anecdotally, Black people don't tend to seek out mental health services in America, which is only exacerbated by the low level of access most of our communities have. So if you review the data from the census and the MHA, only 13.4% of Americans identify as Black.
I love the skin I mean.
Well, sorry, 13.40000000001. 16% of said Blacks reported a mental illness, which is over 7 million people. That's more than Chicago, Philadelphia, and Houston combined. Only about 20% of Black people seek out help, while almost 50% of Caucasians do. And there are several contributing factors to this disparity, be it geographical, access to resources, or even just culture. But when you've grown up in a jungle, you simply adapt. So, Black people, I'm talking to you. See a therapist. Church can only help so much.
I got beans, greens, potatoes, tomatoes, lamb, rams, hogs, dogs, chicken, turkeys, rabbits, you name it! Look.
But back to suicides and dead bodies. The most recent suicide was my neighbor. I was watching tractor pull cart. I was watching anime. The shot was high-pitched and sounded really close. I immediately texted Bugsy, my then partner, and said, "Oh great, either the kids are lighting M80s or niggas out here shooting in the suburbs. We could have stayed in the hood for this shit." An hour later, she came home. We talked for a bit, smoked. I think we played Mario Kart 64. But then we began to hear this eerie wailing. It sounded like an injured animal. We opened the windows and have a look, but there was nothing. So we went back to our own devices, but the moaning started again. And it was obnoxious. It was a nuisance. I put on my shoes and I decided to go outside and sort it, which isn't something I normally do. However, we live in the white suburbs now, so when in Rome. So chest out, I flung the door open thinking, what fresh hell is this? And the universe answered. A ripe one, nigga. My neighbor was in the hall sobbing. My boyfriend killed himself. She was talking to the police. I went back in to let Bugsy know that I'd cracked the case of the wailing cat with my amazing detective skills, and she said, "Nigga, I heard her," which is really weird because she's white. Hearing that coming from a white girl. Either way, I didn't want any part of it. When you grow up in the hood, you're taught from an early age to mind your own business, which is, by the way, completely detrimental to anyone attempting to build a community, now that I think about it. But my hands were shaking, I was sweating, I was having a full-blown panic attack. And I recall begging Bugsy to stay the fuck out of it, but for some reason, for someone that claims to be so private and low-key, she couldn't wait to get us involved. Yes, us. She drugged me into it. I protested to no avail. We had barely been together for a year. Her ID is her firearms registration card. Mine still had my hood address on it. A man just shot himself. She smokes hella weed and didn't nobody have no damn incense. And lastly, the detectives were trying to confirm the girlfriend didn't shoot him. She wouldn't listen to me. I said, ain't shit you can contribute to any of this, but you might as well get your ID out with your stupid ass. So she stormed out the door saying that they wouldn't need her ID. I sat down and I went numb. If he was facing a different direction, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. Our walls are paper thin and this building is not close to being up to code. I was frozen. I didn't know why. Wave after wave of nausea hit me. I later learned that this was PTSD and anxiety. The detectives arrived at my door and, of course, wanted my ID and government name. I gave Bugsy a vicious side eye, birthed from the deepest pits of hell. I sat back down and froze. She couldn't wrap her mind around what I was going through, which is fair because neither could I. She was panicking a little bit but didn't recognize it, but my thoughts were a million miles a second and I couldn't will myself to move. So we fought, of course, her saying that she just wanted to be there for a woman in need, a woman who had lost her loved one in a tragedy, a woman who shouldn't have to go through this alone, a woman who told the police that she was struggling to take care of them and he had been really depressed lately, but she could just believe they could make it if they tried. A woman who she never spoke to or checked on or even thought of again until I worked out my trauma with my therapist. You just wanted to see a dead body, Bugsy, you monster. In fact, if I gave you the rundown of all the horrible shit Bugsy did to me behind my back, you might call her a sociopath, and you definitely call me crazy for staying for so long, which isn't untrue. Maybe I am crazy for having stayed with a possible sociopath for so long. Or maybe I'm just loyal and I don't give up on the people that I love. Maybe she is a sociopath and needed a vicarious dopamine rush on some Colin Robinson shit.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Psychic vampires are a real phenomenon. Or maybe, just maybe, she suffered horrible trauma when she was younger that left her almost numb, and the little girl in her wanted to reach out to another little girl because she knows how it feels. And while she never followed up, that could easily be contributed to anxiety on her part. I learned quite a bit about anxiety and PTSD, which leads me to the next suicide that had the nerve to interrupt my life and is the causality of my PTSD. I'm still working through it. If you've ever had the terrible misfortune of smelling a corpse, then I pity you. Words cannot describe it. So around 7 years prior, while still living in the hood, my landlord called me and began yelling at me about leaving trash in the hallway. I was so mad. I was like, bitch. I'm playing. Everybody who knows Miss Baby Sweets, God rest her soul, knows that she would have thrown my black ass straight down the flight of stairs and everyone would have laughed. I hadn't left any trash in the hall. I mean, not that day. I did have a habit of leaving garbage bags in the hallway for like days at a time. I was a bachelor, I was gross and lazy, probably depressed too, so give me a break. She had me check the halls in the basement, but as soon as I hit the second floor, the stench was overwhelming. I assumed there was a sewer backup. So I reached out to Miss Sweets and she asked me to check on her tenant Reggie. He was a handyman who worked for her and her husband occasionally, and I knocked, but I didn't get an answer. The dog was barking incessantly. Then it dawned on me that I'd never once heard that dog bark at all, and for the past week, as I walked past their door, the dog barked non-stop. Then Reggie's wife and extended family showed up. They asked me to help pop the lock. I was like, oh, 'cause I'm black, I know how to pop locks. Also, why don't you have a key? Something smelled fishy. Oh, fish! Imagine spoiled fish wrapped in K. Michelle's panties, boiled in Flint, Michigan sewer water, and you wouldn't be close to how bad it smelled. So I tried to pop the lock, but the problem is it was locked from the inside, and they wanted me to climb in through the window on the second floor, But I don't have the core strength for that. Shit, I got a dad bod. Plus, when I saw how many flies were swarming the window, I knew what was up immediately. Or so I thought. I grabbed my phone and I called the landlord's son, Mr. G. I explained to him that Reggie may have died from a heart attack or something, and that everyone else seemed to be completely oblivious to that, and I didn't know how to tell them. And that was when he gave me the bad news. His wife hadn't been there for weeks for a very good reason. And this tea was rancid. So I found a ladder in the basement and I attempted to reach the window with zero luck. So one of the nieces climbed the ladder with me in tow and then allowed me to boost her up into the window. And then time stopped. I inhaled and I waited for an emotional scream. Nothing. Nada. I heard nothing. The dog had been left there for over a week with no one to care for it and probably pooped everywhere, and that is where the smell was coming from. Explained the flies too. And it's funny how my ego conveniently filtered out the door being locked from the inside. The psyche is a weird thing. Anyway, so I grabbed the ladder and I head back in. Safe. It was just a false alarm. But that was when their niece burst through their door screaming, "Reggie shot himself!" The psyche is a weird place. It literally circumvents your rationality in order to protect itself. Reggie shot himself and left his bloated fucking corpse rotting for us to find during a 90 to 103 degree humid summer day. His wife was understandably inconsolable, and with good reason. The entire neighborhood surrounded our building. The detectives arrived and questioned us, but I was lost. It was so much at once. I had never seen a dead body. I'd never smelled death. And in the middle of all of this chaos, in the midst of this grotesque fucking circus, I had a flashback. See, a week prior, I'd heard a shot that was suspiciously close. So I did what most black people do. I minded my motherfucking business and took my black ass right back to sleep. When you're surrounded by violence, gunshots become white noise. However, that shot reverberated through my soul and it still echoes from time to time. I lamented not being able to stand up and be a good citizen. I should have called 911. I should have been the change I wanted to see in the black community. Too many of our people aren't getting the help they need, and it's devastating us. I was on the other side, but I still heard something, which means everyone on his side definitely heard the shot, but no one did anything. Even so, I should have done something. He might still be alive. He might have been saved. It was only a 22. He could have been saved. Reggie also raped his niece. She'd been complaining about him to her family, stating that he kept touching her, allegedly. No one listened to her or did anything about it, so one day he violently raped that innocent little queen. He, of course, denied it, saying that she was making it all up. Yes, Reggie, that tiny little girl was clearly after your dozens of dollars. His wife left after the confrontation, ashamed and likely fearful of the looming consequences. Locked himself in his apartment, put a gun to his head, and pulled the trigger. Months later, Mrs. Sweets passed away, and her son inherited the property. He had the apartment cleaned, remodeled, had hardwood flooring installed, and after the renovation, Mr. G leased the unit to a nice lady. I don't remember her name, so we'll call her Granny, but let me tell you, old black Christian women have zero chill, and they ain't scared of shit but the Lord. One of the tenants hadn't paid rent in over a year. She also had a convicted sexual predator as a boyfriend who didn't register his address, and we lived a block away from a school. So what I mean is, she's great. Mr. G was finally granted an eviction, but on her way out, she decided to stop on the second floor and inform the new tenant about her murder crib. She stated, "Before I go, let me tell you about the shit that really went down in this apartment. And why your apartment is nicer than everyone else's." And Granny cut her off and said the following, verbatim, by the way. Ma'am, my house is sanctified and blessed by the blood of Jesus, and ain't shit you can tell me," and slammed the door in that bitch's face. The nerve of this bitch. You sitting around letting bum-ass pedo niggas be around your kids, live off you, take your money, and when you are finally forced to leave without paying back rent, by the way, you try to cause random emotional trauma to a complete stranger? Guys, I know I'm dragging her, but realistically, this woman has serious emotional issues. This is not the behavior of a normal person. So again, black people, mental health services, use them if you got them. That trauma, the shot, the guilt of my apathy, the entire experience never left me. So when my next door neighbor shot himself, my psyche immediately went into preservation mode. Yeah, it was probably fireworks. It wasn't though. And now, every time I hear a gunshot, my body, my mind, and my spirit sends me into a spiral of anxiety, and I go numb. I go still. I began therapy directly following this, and I learned what anxiety and PTSD is. In closing, on a more whimsical note, Reggie's sister-in-law savagely said, "Oh, he shot himself? Good. That means that bastard did that shit, and I hope he burning in hell." But you love who you love. Sometimes we love monsters, Bugsy. Even the sharpest knife will dull when it's pointed at someone you love. Even the widest boundary runs thin. But he crossed the line, and his wife had drawn one. Though his sister-in-law feels that line should have been drawn in chalk, the real victim is the poor baby who probably blames herself for his death. And if she wasn't given adequate treatment, she probably wasn't. And Bubba's wife was devastated, as you can imagine, torn between the loss of her husband and the repulsive nature of what he'd done. The sheer ambivalence of it all must have been a nightmare. But again, you love who you love. It could have been worse. What if she said nothing? He would still be here, monster that he was, and she would be stuck sleeping next to a lurking demon right now, cutting off her family and ignoring obvious red flags because, again, we love who we love. And sometimes we love monsters. It's the truth. So, realistically, she dodged a bullet. But Reggie didn't.